The luxurious first-class cabin froze when the flight attendant blocked Sophia's path. "Ma'am, I believe there's been an error. This section is reserved for first-class passengers only." The sharp, cutting gaze of the wealthy passenger who had spoken made Sophia feel the sting of her ticket being questioned. Within moments, however, Eduardo Vasquez, billionaire, Sophia's devoted husband, and majority owner of the very airline they were flying, would walk through that door and shift the balance of power in this room of hasty judgments. Sofia Mendez adjusted the watch on her wrist nervously, a gift from Eduardo that carried with it the memory of their first meeting. At 35, her simple, elegant dress stood in stark contrast to the designer outfits and jewelry that dominated the priority boarding area. Stellar Airways' first-class cabin gleamed with pristine leather seats, perfectly groomed flight attendants, and the subtle aroma of champagne in the air. Eduardo had insisted she take this flight solo as a reward for organizing a successful charity event. "You deserve all the luxury in the world," he'd said before an emergency meeting had called him away. He promised to join her later at the resort. Taking a deep breath, Sophia handed her first-class ticket to the attendant at the gate, preparing to allow herself a taste of the luxury she usually steered clear of, despite her marriage to one of the wealthiest men in the country. "I'm sorry, but this area is for first-class passengers only," Camila Reynolds, the head flight attendant, declared. Her gaze coolly scanned Sophia's simple dress, the condescending tone in her voice slicing through the air. Tall, impeccably groomed, Camila wore her blonde hair in a tight bun, her navy uniform adorned with gold stripes that felt less like symbols of service and more like badges of superiority. "I have a first-class ticket," Sophia replied calmly, offering her boarding pass. Camila took it delicately, her fingers barely brushing the paper as though it might contaminate her. Her French manicured nails gleamed under the cabin lights. "There seems to be a mistake," Camila said, her perfectly sculpted eyebrows arching with suspicion. "Perhaps your information was entered incorrectly." She scrutinized the ticket from multiple angles, her lips pressed tightly in a practiced show of doubt. Nearby, a man in a sharp suit lowered his financial newspaper, gold cufflinks flashing as he adjusted his reading glasses. "Must happen all the time," he remarked, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Economy class is getting crowded these days." The other first-class passengers glanced up, some with barely veiled smirks, others with quiet curiosity. A couple in matching designer outfits exchanged whispered words, their eyes flicking between Sophia and her modest attire. Camila's smile was a brittle thing, her teeth blindingly white. "Let me check if we can accommodate you in the back," she said, the emphasis on comfortable, practically dripping with disdain. "I'm sure you'll feel much more at ease there." Sophia felt her face flush, the heat creeping up her neck. "Please double-check. My husband bought this seat for me personally." Sophia maintained her composure, the training she'd once had as a flight attendant grounding her. "Your husband?" A woman draped in diamonds, one that could have fed a small country, laughed lightly, her voice dripping with mockery. "Oh, darling, everyone says that when they're angling for an upgrade. Next thing you know, he'll be a CEO or some other imaginative title." A ripple of discreet laughter spread through the cabin as Camila exchanged a look with another crew member, her gaze dripping with unspoken judgment. Sophia, her fingers resting on the watch Eduardo had given her when they first met, felt a calmness wash over her. The cool metal against her skin brought her strength. She'd faced prejudice before, but never from fellow professionals in a career she had once. The luxurious first-class cabin froze when the flight attendant blocked Sophia's path. "Ma'am, I believe there's been an error. This section is reserved for first-class passengers only." The sharp, cutting gaze of the wealthy passenger who had spoken made Sophia feel the sting of her ticket being questioned. Within moments, however, Eduardo Vasquez, billionaire, Sophia's devoted husband, and majority owner of the very airline they were flying, would walk through that door and shift the balance of power in this room of hasty judgments. Sofia Mendez adjusted the watch on her wrist nervously, a gift from Eduardo that carried with it the memory of their first meeting. At 35, her simple, elegant dress stood in stark contrast to the designer outfits and jewelry that dominated the priority boarding area. Stellar Airways' first-class cabin gleamed with pristine leather seats, perfectly groomed flight attendants, and the subtle aroma of champagne in the air. Eduardo had insisted she take this flight solo as a reward for organizing a successful charity event. "You deserve all the luxury in the world," he'd said before an emergency meeting had called him away. He promised to join her later at the resort. Taking a deep breath, Sofia handed her first-class ticket to the attendant at the gate, preparing to allow herself a taste of the luxury she usually steered clear of, despite her marriage to one of the wealthiest men in the country. "I'm sorry, but this area is for first-class passengers only," Camila Reynolds, the head flight attendant, declared. Her gaze coolly scanned Sofia's simple dress, the condescending tone in her voice slicing through the air. Tall, impeccably groomed, Camila wore her blonde hair in a tight bun, her navy uniform adorned with gold stripes that felt less like symbols of service and more like badges of superiority. "I have a first-class ticket," Sofia replied calmly, offering her boarding pass. Camila took it delicately, her fingers barely brushing. His perfectly tailored navy blue Tom Ford suit added to the sense of authority he exuded, every inch the powerful man he was. His silver-threaded temples added distinction to his otherwise dark hair, styled with the elegance of a man who possessed both power and restraint. The cabin fell deathly silent. Eduardo's piercing steel-blue eyes swept over the room, quickly taking in the scene before locking onto Sofia. His face remained stoic, but those who knew him could detect the slight tightening around his eyes, a warning sign of the simmering rage beneath his composed exterior. "Sofia," he said, his voice deep and resonant, filling the entire cabin with its quiet command. "Is there a problem?" Camila and the manager exchanged frantic glances, their certainty faltering. "Sir, we're just sorting out a minor seating issue," the manager explained, his tone shifting from dismissive to overly deferential as he recognized the unexpected shift in power. Eduardo moved toward them with the unhurried grace of someone who owned not just the plane but the very air around him. Each step he took seemed to amplify his presence. The passengers instinctively shrank back as he passed. "That's my wife's seat," he continued, his accent infusing the words with an almost musical authority. "Two A's. Your wife," Camila repeated, her face draining of color like water slipping from a broken vessel. A ripple of whispers spread through the cabin, immediate and electric. Eduardo stepped closer, positioning himself beside Sofia. One hand rested gently on the small of her back, a gesture both protective and possessive. His six-figure watch gleamed subtly on his wrist, not loud, not showy, but unmistakably valuable to those who knew how to look. "Yes, Sofia Mendez Vasquez, my wife. Is there an issue with her accommodation?" His question was polite, yet it carried the weight of someone used to getting answers when they were required. The manager's composure cracked visibly. "Mr. Vasquez, we had no idea. We were just following protocol to verify." "Verify what, exactly?" Eduardo asked, his gaze unwavering and piercing. His eyes moved deliberately from the manager to Camila, pinning them both in turn. "Whether she belongs in first class based on her appearance?" The cabin fell into an almost unnatural silence, the kind that swallows even the sound of a breath, as the reality of who he was, and the colossal mistake they'd made, began to settle over everyone. "Mr. Vasquez, I didn't know," Camila stammered, her face now an unnatural shade of white. All the previous arrogance evaporated as quickly as morning dew under a scorching sun. Her uniform badge visibly trembled against her chest, and the gold pins caught the light with every nervous shift. Sweat began to bead along her hairline, threatening to ruin the perfect makeup she'd worked so hard to maintain. Eduardo's presence seemed to expand, a quiet storm filling the cabin with a palpable energy. Though he hadn't raised his voice or made any grand gestures, the shift in power was seismic. At 45, Eduardo carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built an empire from the ground up, not from inheritance, but from intelligence and sheer will. "Clearly," he said, his voice cold but absolute, the single word hanging in the air like a verdict. Eduardo took a moment to observe the scene. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes that one business magazine had once described as capable of cutting through corporate smokescreens, registered every detail. Sophia's embarrassment, her shoulders slightly hunched despite her best efforts to maintain composure. The wide-eyed looks of the passengers, some already tapping their phones frantically as they recognized him. The flight crew's rapid shift from authoritative to servile in mere moments. When Eduardo spoke again, his voice was calm, but it carried an undeniable authority, making each word weigh heavily in the air. "Did you know, before we married, that Sophia was the youngest head flight attendant in the history of Stellar Airways?" His hand stayed protectively at the small of Sophia's back. "She understands more about protocol and service than probably everyone in this cabin combined." An audible sigh swept through the seats. The woman with the diamond necklace who had mocked Sophia was now staring intently at the in-flight magazine, her fingers twisting nervously around her gold wedding band. The businessman who had complained about the delay now found his shoes suddenly fascinating. She once prevented a mid-air emergency by recognizing a passenger's symptoms before the man even realized something was wrong. Eduardo continued, a subtle note of pride warming his otherwise measured tone. "She saved his life. The airline had given her a commendation for that, one still proudly displayed at company headquarters. Though, I'm beginning to wonder if anyone here has actually seen it." Camilla's complexion had shifted from pale to ashen. The manager tugged nervously at his collar, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. Eduardo's tone remained unchanged as he continued. "I requested that the flight wait for my arrival because I wanted to surprise my wife. It seems, however, that I've arrived at a rather opportune moment." The pause before opportune spoke volumes, an elegant masterclass in understated threat. He turned to the manager, who was now clutching his hat like a shield. "As the majority shareholder of Stellar Airways, I am deeply concerned about what I've witnessed here today." The words majority shareholder hit like a silent bomb. A passenger near the window audibly gasped. Camila had to lean against the back of a seat to stay upright, her knuckles white where she gripped the leather. "Mr. Vasquez," the manager began, his voice cracking slightly, "I can assure you this was an isolated misunderstanding." Eduardo raised his hand. The simple motion instantly silenced the manager. "Misunderstandings have consequences, don't they?" His tone was almost conversational, making the implied threat even sharper. He pulled his phone from his pocket, typing with swift, decisive movements. "I've just sent an email to the board. Starting tomorrow, all Stellar Airways employees will undergo a new anti-discrimination training program." He turned to Camila, his gaze unwavering. "Miss Reynolds, you'll have the honor of being the first participant." Camila swallowed hard, unable to form a response. Her career, once a shining achievement, now flashed before her eyes like a condemned building. The silver wings pin on her uniform, which had once filled her with pride, now felt as though it weighed 1,000 pounds. "As for the Director of Customer Experience position we've been discussing," Eduardo continued, turning his attention back to the manager, "I believe my wife, with her extensive experience at the company and her recent experience as a customer, will be perfectly qualified to take over, if she wishes." Sophia's eyes widened slightly. This was the first she'd heard of such a position. A flicker of surprise crossed her face before she quickly composed herself. Eduardo then addressed the entire cabin, his voice projected clearly for all to hear, but never rising above a controlled pitch. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. As compensation, Champagne will be complimentary for the remainder of the flight. Then, just for Camila, he added in a lower tone that still carried across the cabin. Please ensure my wife receives the appropriate attention during the flight. Your future with this company depends on it. Camila nodded silently, her empire of arrogance now utterly destroyed. The transformation was complete, from an imperious authority figure to a humble servant in mere minutes. She stepped back, motioning for the other flight attendants to begin service immediately. No one in the cabin missed the irony or the lesson. The businessmen who had once been dismissive now observed with newfound respect, not just for Eduardo's power, but for Sofia's quiet dignity throughout it all. Later, at the luxurious beachfront resort, Sofia and Eduardo shared a glass of wine on the private balcony of their suite, the sunset bathing the ocean in golden hues. The flight, after the initial confrontation, had proceeded in tense silence, with Camila avoiding eye contact while serving Sofia with a level of deference so painful it was almost palpable. You always knew how to make an entrance, Sofia remarked with a small smile tugging at her lips. Eduardo chuckled softly. This wasn't how I envisioned our reunion, Eduardo confessed, his hand gently holding hers. But I have to admit, it was satisfying to witness their reactions. Sofia gazed out at the ocean for a long moment, the sound of the waves mingling with the silence between them. You know, she said softly, for years, I've avoided using your name or your position. I wanted to be known for my own accomplishments, not as Mrs. Vasquez. And you succeeded, Eduardo affirmed with a nod. The charity event you organized raised more money for underprivileged children than any other in the foundation's history. Still, a trace of hesitation lingered on Sofia's face as she absent-mindedly touched the watch Eduardo had given her all those years ago. Sometimes, she murmured, I miss my independence, the career I was building before everything changed. Eduardo studied her carefully, his gaze softening. That's exactly why I created the Director of Customer Experience position, he said, his voice steady. It's not a favor, Sofia. It's because no one is more qualified than you. Sofia looked at him in surprise, her brow furrowing. You planned this before the incident on the plane? Eduardo smiled, a hint of warmth in his eyes. It was going to be your anniversary gift. You've got the experience, the vision, and now, after today, you know exactly what needs to be changed. Sofia felt a sudden catch in her throat, her eyes welling with unexpected tears. You never stopped believing in me, she said quietly, even when I doubted myself. Eduardo's fingers brushed gently over the watch on her wrist, his voice low and intimate. Remember what I said when I gave it to you? Time is the only luxury that really matters, how we choose to use it, and with whom we share it. Sofia nodded, recalling the young businessman she had met years ago, serving coffee in first class. That flight attendant, Eduardo continued, his voice filled with reverence, taught me more about dignity and excellence in those 3 hours than I ever learned in boardrooms and business meetings. I didn't fall in love with Mrs. Vasquez, the billionaire's wife. I fell in love with Sofia Mendez, the woman who treated every passenger, whether a CEO or a child traveling alone, with the same respect. Sofia squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of their shared memories. The sunset reflected on the watch, a symbol not just of time but of the journey they had taken together. So, Eduardo asked softly, what does the future director of customer experience think about transforming Stellar Airways? Sofia smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. I think it's time for a new chapter. So, what did you think of that unexpected twist? Did Eduardo's reveal as the airline's owner catch you as off guard as it did the arrogant flight crew? Sadly, far too many people are judged daily by their appearance, clothing, or background, without anyone ever knowing their true story or value. Have you ever experienced a similar situation, or witnessed someone being unfairly underestimated? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this one, and hit the bell to be notified when we publish new videos. Your comments mean the world to us. Let us know where you're watching from, and share this video with someone you think needs to hear this powerful message about not judging by appearances and how a person's true worth is so much more than what the eye can see. Until the next story, one that'll make you rethink your perceptions and celebrate the power of treating everyone with dignity and respect.